Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I just want to thank Lynn and also the Honorable Jackie Witherspoon for inviting me today. I was very, very excited and impressed to really speak to such a global audience. So I want to introduce myself again. My name is Audrey Moore, and I am actually the Chief of the Special Victims Bureau and the Chief of the Domestic Violence Unit in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. We were talking a little bit, and I know Mary was talking about headlines, and the thing that's very unfortunate, those headlines could have taken place anywhere, and they could have taken place right here in New York City. And when we look at the statistics just about what's going on in the United States, just to kind of frame the issue a little bit, they're not very promising. 1 in 4 women is going to experience domestic violence in their lifetime. And every minute, 24 people in the United States experience domestic violence. So just think about how many people have been assaulted by the time that we leave this presentation today. Every day, 3 women are killed by their spouses, and 1 in 5 women will be raped in their lifetime. The picture in New York City, and right now we should just talk about some of what I'm going to talk about now in terms of numbers, are just what has been reported. But we have to be very mindful that when you're talking about domestic violence, when you're talking about rape, when you're talking about child abuse or human trafficking, so much of it is underreported. So these numbers are just giving us a glimpse of what really exists out there. In New York City last year, the police department responded to 263,207 domestic violence incidents. Now, not all of those are violent. Some of those could have been arguments. But those were incidents that the police deemed domestic violence, 263,000. That is averaging 720 incidents a day, and that's New York City alone. The court system last year handled 24,356 domestic violence cases, and that was in New York City, the 5 counties. And on an average, the New York City, the domestic violence hotline, they answer about 290 calls per day. In my office, where we prosecute cases, domestic violence cases, last year we averaged about 5,500 cases. And depending upon whose stats you look at, it might be down a slight. But when everybody's talking about how crime has been going down and we're celebrating that, domestic violence tends to hold its own, or it goes up. So there's something, sometimes we would like to think that maybe it's because we're doing a better job that people are finally coming forward, or maybe it's just that domestic violence is going up and there's more violence. We're not exactly sure what to make. I would like to think because people are feeling more receptive to coming forward to report crimes, that might be is that it's not the violence going up, that we're finally getting, the truer numbers, but we really can't tell. One of the things that he was really committed to doing was making sure that victims of some of the most sensitive crimes were really getting the help that they needed. So he had this wonderful idea to create a Special Victims Bureau. And then he had this, I should say, a very interesting idea about putting me in charge of it. And I have to say, you applaud people who say that they're going to do stuff and actually execute it in terms of politicians. And DA Vance has most definitely done that. So he put me in charge of our Special Victims Bureau. And that handles our domestic violence cases, our child abuse cases, our sex crimes cases, our elder abuse, because that's also people that you don't really hear a lot of talking about, but they are sexually assaulted and they are victims of domestic violence, very much so, and human trafficking, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. And part of his thought was that, if you put all of these units together, number one, we can coordinate, have a better coordinated response and put our resources together. And I always say what he's allowed us to do is to really create, I always call it like the super bureau in terms of resources. So he's given us, special victim investigators. So for example, if for some reason I need to get help immediately, and maybe it's just better for me to use an investigator that works in our office, we have the resources to do that. We have counselors, we have victim aid advocates that are all part of this Special Victims Bureau. But I have to tell you, if you're talking about how you're going to make a difference in terms of strategies for preventing domestic violence and just violence in general, you have to me at least, look at the criminal justice as one of the partners, but not necessarily, I would say, overall the solution. But when you're looking at DA's offices, I think it's important for us to be specially trained. So one of the things that we do in our office is to make sure that the ADAs who are handling, the domestic violence cases, the child abuse, the human trafficking, all those types of cases are specially trained. And that doesn't mean that I stand in front of them all the time as an assistant district attorney and talk to them about the law. It's important for them to know the law and to understand the different nuances of how we can charge and hold defendants accountable, but you have to bring in outside people. So one of the things that we do, we bring in, if I want someone to talk about the dynamics of domestic violence, to understand, why people stay, because that's always some of the first things that you have to teach assistants is not to judge. And one of the ways that you have to do that is, to me, is you bring in people to talk to them. Even though I always flip the question, and I always tell people, flip the question. It's not why does she stay? If she's so bad, why doesn't he go? I mean, you gotta put the focus. Well, and this is what you have, and I always tell people, we cannot let the lens be moved. The lens should be on the defendant's bad behavior, not on the victim and who she is. And I use the term victim, and I know some people are like, why isn't she saying survivor, and you're cutting me looks, because in the criminal justice world, victims are what we call the people, and I understand all of our women are survivors. Right. But the focus has to always stay on the defendant. And we have people come in. We had a panel of organizations that deal with people from South Asia, from Africa, from all these different cultural perspectives that you hear from the people who work at those organizations to kind of understand how you address people. Because I know when I started, we always look through things through a lens of America. If someone doesn't look you in the eye, that means they're lying. In other countries, that means you're being disrespectful. And you also have to deal with other countries. When people are coming from other countries, I remember one of the first cases I handled 1,000 years ago, because I've been a prosecutor for a little bit more than a hot minute. I was speaking with someone who was from another country, and at the end, we were talking about, and we were giving him witness fees like transportation to get home, and he thought he had to give me money. And it's also of us understanding how different cultures work and what goes on. So then when you're dealing with a person, you're dealing with the person as where they are, not where we like them to be, and you understand their perspective. So that's one of the things that we feel is very important for our assistant district attorneys to know. We also think that we had to change the language in terms of how you even screen cases. Like, you cannot go to someone who is married or in a relationship with someone and say, have you been raped? They will always say, no. You have to, and that shouldn't be your first question either, but you have to build up to that. But the question really has to be looked at in terms of, have you ever had sex when you didn't want to? Now that's that's framed differently, and then you're going to get an answer, and then you're going to sit there and see, well, is this something that's also criminal? I mean, one of the things that we found as we started to look at human trafficking cases, and human trafficking is going on all over the world, but I can tell you right now, someone is being trafficked in New York City, and domestically, these young people, who are being forced to sell their bodies, they are being trafficked. And we really had to look at, when you're looking at someone who's been arrested for prostitution, you have to talk to them. Do not look at them as a defendant. This is a potential victim of a crime. And we really have changed our dialogue in terms of how we treat people. We have specialized assistants who deal with, we have one part that deals with victims who are people who are charged with prostitution, and they're looking at human trafficking now. We're looking to talk to. So when they're talking about their pimp, they see that as boyfriend, girlfriend sometimes. It's not pimp. We got to get rid of these terms and these lenses in terms of how we look at stuff. So we're training our assistants to really know who is sitting in front of you and really try to figure out what their story is. And we've been able to actually discover cases and prosecute people for human trafficking on that level.